All right, on this episode, Forbes and I talk with Luke Beardslee, who, on a personal note, one of my best friends, best man at my wedding. But he is also, I guess the term would be a restaurateur. He's an executive for a bunch of restaurants. He helps open restaurants, helps with the menus, helps with all the stuff behind the scenes. And he talks about how COVID-19 has affected the restaurant industry and the ripple effects, be it from the suppliers to the farmers, and even, I would say, dare I say, even more important, service industry, one of the last places a person without a degree can make middle-class money. So this is a really good one, guys. Sit back, enjoy, and as always,
Free the bear. Grrr.
All right, Luke. So I guess the first question I'm going to ask you, because I know the answer, I believe, but I still think it's important for the few people who will eventually listen to this. What exactly do you do in the restaurant industry?
So I've had a bunch of different positions over the years, but I, started out kind of at the bottom and then worked my way up to being an executive chef at a restaurant in California. Did that for a couple of years out there, and then we ended up moving back to the East Coast, where I took over a restaurant in the waterfront in Boston. I was executive chef there for 6 years and moved on to run two other places in addition to the one unit in Southie. We had two very busy restaurants at Logan Airport that I worked at. And while I was there, I did executive chef work, but then I also did a lot of kind of just general management stuff for the units, lease negotiation. There was a lot of hoops to jump through, obviously, at the airport for running a restaurant that was post-security. And then after those places, I moved on to doing a new opening of a huge restaurant that we just opened last year on Boylston Street, Coplet, in the Peru. There's like this big foyer in the Peru, kind of like an outdoor patio setting. And we have this whole multi-revenue stream restaurant that's attached to that building, which we opened. So I did that, worked on that project, helped to get that open, and designed the kitchen, the cafe, and a bunch of that stuff. And then I've kind of been working in conjunction with the culinary director of our company to kind of oversee places that need a little bit of kind of love or whatever, need some help with inventory control or menu development, or if there's a chef who leaves or has to be removed, I'll go in and I'll kind of run that until we have something figured out. So I did that for about a year. And then I have most recently taken over running our restaurants on Lansdowne Street outside my park. We have we technically have 5 venues down there, 2 of which are attached to the park. And then a small club called Bill's Bar, and then a huge Irish pub called Lansdowne Pub, and a southern kind of fried chicken restaurant called The Bread's Last Call, all of which do music and, a lot of promotion type of stuff. So that's it. Sorry about the long-windedness.
No, that's quite a resume, to say the least, for a communications major. No, so I guess when COVID came and reared its ugly head, what percentage of employees would you say you guys had to temporarily let go?
So when COVID came along, we furloughed probably 99% of our employees, because in Massachusetts, we were shut down. I believe it's all been a blur, and we can get into some of the details maybe later about kind of what that journey's been like. But we closed all of we have 24 units that are kind of standalone LLCs, and then we have a whole another wing of the business which is called King's Bowling Alleys, and we have those in a number of different states throughout the country, and a number of them in Massachusetts. So the Kings are bowling alleys that also do a bunch of other entertainment and food and stuff like that, and those were completely shuttered because obviously the to-go business was all that we were able to generate revenue from up until think 2 weeks ago now. So we were shut down on March 17th. And then we were told that we would be able to do takeout only moving forward. So we closed all of our restaurants except for 3. And I think altogether, if you include the Kings and the places we have at Mohegan Sun, I mean, we have over 30 venues. And we kept 3 of them open. We probably laid off probably 2,500 people.
Luke, can I ask you, like, so if you switched over to completely just, how do you put it, like, again, just takeout, like, how much revenue, like, I know you said there's only like 3 places left. How much revenue, like, what was the percentage of revenue left over if it's just takeout? Like, how much of a cut are we talking for those 3 places that could still stay open?
Yeah, so I mean, it totally depends on the venue, of course, because some places were geared more towards the food end of food and beverage. And then we had a lot of other places that were much more geared towards the beverage end of that spectrum, where all of the money actually is. So the places that we kept open were, one of them is in Burlington, which is a suburb. So I guess to answer your question directly, it depends on the venue, because some of the venues were already doing a good percentage split. The place that I was working at and running for a couple months after, I think it was mid-April until just a few weeks ago, we were doing probably about a quarter of the sales that were in food. So we were down 75% in food revenue, and the beverage was essentially non-existent. We were allowed to obviously to sell beer and wine to go initially in Massachusetts, but people weren't really buying a lot of it. I'm not really sure why. I mean, the liquor stores were deemed essential, which I agree with, but people weren't coming out to the. In Massachusetts, man, if they had closed the liquor stores, it would have been like Liberia in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that I don't think people understand. Like, again, like, that wasn't just like LOL, like, we're just going to have like these liquor stores be essential. If you have a bunch of alcoholics detox,
yes, detox, no, totally. And like not wanting people to have to go to the hospital and stuff like that. But yeah, so I mean, the place that I was at, the revenue was down 75% in food. The food to beverage split in pre-COVID was probably about I would say probably a 25-75 split, with the 75 being on food. So this was a neighborhood restaurant, Beacon Hill, that had a good following, and it was kind of right across from MGH, actually, from Mass General Hospital. So we did a lot with the hospital over that time. Yeah, I mean, it decimated us. I mean, we went from doing $40,000 a week in food on a good week to doing $10,000 in food and maybe another 10 to 14 in food, and then maybe another $2,000 in beverage if we were lucky to do that and sell a bunch of beer.
And then again, you said like there's basically no one left, and like the workforce is, as you said, 1% pretty much is the only one there.
So I mean, this restaurant that we were running in Beacon Hill, it was me 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day by myself in the kitchen. A director, one of the directors from our company, who's somebody who usually oversees several venues, and he was literally packing to-go orders, answering the phone, taking to-go orders, and doing the Grubhub and Uber Eats and Caviar platform stuff. It was insane. It was horrible.
Yeah, it totally catastrophic. Absolutely.
And I think that you brought up a really interesting point that I don't think many people know. Most restaurants, you break even with the food, or you make a slight profit. You make your money on desserts and alcohol. That's where
so I mean, it depends on the venue. So I think that's true. I think that could be true at a higher end restaurant for sure. A lot of those higher end restaurants are making their money off bottles of wine. They're making their money off cocktails and certainly desserts, because it's a little bit cheaper and you can charge more. You're not dealing with highly expensive proteins and stuff like that. Our group, we aim to achieve at maximum a 30% cost on food. So, if we're selling the plate for $10, we're purchasing $3 of that, marketing it up 70%. And we that's kind of the top end. We really want to be running about a 25% food cost. So, I mean, you certainly make the money off the booze. I mean, the math is obviously simple. We pay $10 a bottle for, a bottle of Well vodka. and you get 16 drinks out of that. So I'm horrible at math. I know you're great at math, Billy. So whatever 16 into 10 is, but you're paying less than $1 per drink, and you're selling the drink for $10. So on that side, we're looking at a 90%, at least, and probably a 90% markup on liquor.
I was going to ask you too about, because you brought up that you work with the distributors. How much of just a chain reaction has this been for the restaurant industry, affecting like your food suppliers, your silverware people? Like what's that been like?
Well, it's been like a sea change because, and we're actually, a lot of that stuff are really just kind of getting into now. There's been some shortages in some areas. One of the first things that kind of happened was there being a huge shortage in chicken, because of what kept happening is the fearless leader Trump, put like the one thing that he did for the restaurant industry was tell the chicken butchers at the chicken factories in the Midwest, they have to go to work by the War Powers Act or whatever kind of bullshit that was. But basically what was happening with with poultry, and then it happened in a number of other markets as well, is that one person would get sick in the factory, and then the factory would close down. And this is a factory that's producing, tens of thousands of pounds of finished, butchered, chicken, because most restaurants, the majority of restaurants are buying constituent parts of broken down chicken. They're buying chicken tenders or chicken breasts or thighs. Certainly a lot of places will also buy whole chickens, but the majority of that stuff is kind of split and butchered. So you'd have these places that had, 500 or 600 meat cutters in the factory out in the Midwest, and then the virus would ravage through there, and there's literally nobody else to work. So then the market would be back by a month. They had to slaughter and just throw away. I was reading this in one of the market updates, something like 1.5 million chickens, because they didn't have anybody to clean them and butcher them and cut them. So that kind of thing has been a thing in different industries throughout this process up to now. It's starting to even out a little bit on some of the protein markets and stuff like that, but it's still, we get updates from our purveyors about the market, and it still, fluctuates. And with these resurgences and stuff, I guarantee that we're going to see inconsistencies. We've had inconsistencies with specific size product as well. Kind of with beef, it's like you can still get like whole sides easily, but most people are butchering in their restaurants now, so it's definitely put a wrench in the machine works.
Luke, can I just ask you, in perfect conditions, what is I've heard some figures thrown around, but like in perfect conditions, in a perfect economy, a new restaurant starts up, right? And a lot of like restaurants, some new places were about to start or just said started right when COVID-19 hit. What's the usual kind of failure rate for a restaurant? What are we talking about? Like, how hard is it to get it up and running, and then COVID comes in and just slaps you down?
It's hard to say. I don't know what the statistics are right now. You always hear numbers thrown around about the failure rate of opening restaurants, and it's a really tight margin operation. And you're dealing with perishable goods. So, but I think a lot of those factors depend on the structure of your company. If you're opening a restaurant as an independent operator and you're putting bank loan money into it, you don't really have any recourse outside of revenue. For us, we're a large company. All of the restaurants are LLCs and kind of technically operate independently legally, but we have the ability to kind of share employees who are working at the corporate level and stuff like that. So it makes it a lot easier for us. Now, some of our restaurants, specifically from our experience in our company, had reserves in the bank. Also, our company was eligible for PPP loans, and we were able to secure some of those to try and bring people back, really having a revenue stream, which we did, which was great. But I think there's a big chasm between the experience of somebody who's an independent operator who only has access to bank capital versus a group like the group that I work for, where there's a lot of independent investors who are putting cash into a project with an expected return at a later date, as opposed to a bank loan that has to be paid every month. There's more negotiation that can happen. So that's been beneficial to us. In Massachusetts, I've heard that 25% of restaurants at this point are not reopening. I don't know that. I haven't gone and looked at the data very specifically, but in some of the stuff that I've read on some industry media, I've heard 25%, and that's at this point. So if there's another big uptick in Massachusetts, I'm sure that number is going to get up into the 40s or 50s. That would be my assumption.
You're reopening, which is great. What is the risk long-term for your restaurants if you have an outbreak of COVID in your work staff? Is that something you guys fear, like the long-term effects of that?
So we have very specific protocols that we've set up along with our risk management leadership in our company. We obviously, we run a lot of big bars in the middle of a relatively populous city with a lot of students and a lot of hooliganish sports fans. So, we definitely have a good barometer for what kind of, for risk management in our venues. But this is obviously a totally different beast. We have very specific protocols set up. We're doing temperature checks on all of our employees, which is kind of BS in my personal opinion, because from everything that I've read about COVID, it's, if you're symptomatic, you might have a fever, but I actually had COVID-19. We can talk about that if we want to, but when I had it, ended up having a fever, but it only lasted for, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 days full on. And prior to that, I hadn't really felt sick at all. So the temperature check thing is kind of, I think, a little bit of just like an emotional kind of assuaging kind of thing. But we are tracking that. We are being very explicit with our employees that if you're showing any of the symptoms, that you are not to show up to work. Or paying people who test positive and have to leave work, requiring people to quarantine for 14 days if they travel outside of a specific set of areas. Massachusetts is one of only four of the states in the union right now that is actually seeing like a negative infection rate, which is great. But we've also opened up a little bit more slowly than some other places as well. So we remains to be seen. But trying to adapt as best we can. We're running very limited staff. We're requiring people to sign off on hand washing every 15 minutes. Masks are worn at all times. Obviously we're being extraordinarily cautious in the kitchen. We have hand sanitization stations set up. We have social distancing stickers on the floors for the bathrooms and for the patios. We have set up our dining rooms to make sure that obviously everything is 6 feet apart. No parties of over 6. No seating at the bar. All the bar stools are gone. People are required to be sitting while they're in the restaurant or on the patio. There's no kind of standing around milling. Gloves are actually not necessarily safer than hand washing, but we've given our employees the option to do whichever one is more comfortable for them. And that's something that I'm kind of interested to see if guests are more weirded out by people without gloves or more weirded out by people with gloves, because actually hand washing is really the most important thing to be doing. Yeah, but that's kind of like what we're doing. And as far as like, if the protocol that we have is if somebody tests positive in the restaurant, everybody we close it immediately. And everybody who's interacted with that person needs to get tested, and anybody obviously test positive needs to stay out of work until they're symptom-free. Until they test negative and are symptom-free, and 2 weeks after the test, they can come back. So that's kind of, and then obviously if somebody tests positive when we close the venue, the first thing that we would do is hire one of our cleaning companies that we use to come in and do a complete tear down of the restaurant and sanitize it.
This kind of like general practices for the industry, or is this something like more like a Massachusetts regulation kind of thing?
So some of the stuff is specific to Massachusetts state regulation, the social distancing guidelines, no bar seating, the no parties of over 6. I think a lot of this stuff is local. But in addition to that, we have obviously contacts in the Massachusetts Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association, and they've provided a lot of guidance kind of by kind of collating information from different states who've dealt with reopenings, at different times in this process, and figuring out kind of best practices, what guests are expecting, and because obviously at the end of the day, there's all this technical stuff, but we're still trying to do the same thing, which is obviously at the base of it, make money. But the way that we're attempting to do that is by making people feel comfortable in our spaces, being inviting, making them feel like they can come in and just chill out and forget the world for a little while, which is what we always tried to do. But I think that aspect of it is even more important now. So a lot of it is state guidelines, but then a lot of it is best practices from the National Restaurant Association, Massachusetts Restaurant Association, and then just like what can you do to make people just be able to have that experience that everybody's been craving. And,
Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, it's a little tricky because, like, even if the state says you guys are open again, as a customer, like personally, like right now, we've had some stuff open up, even here in California, even though again they're kind of backtracking because we've had some massive spikes. But
right.
Long story short is just that, like, I don't feel 100% comfortable in certain situations. So, like, for example, like I have this general rule that any place I would go to has to be like kind of like outside, bathed in sunlight, that kind of thing. So do you still think that it's going to be for a long time that people are just not going to be comfortable coming back just on general principle?
I have thought a lot about this, but I think that it's going to depend on a lot of different factors. I think that it's a very personal thing because I think that, and not to get into the politics of it too much, but there are people who are just pretending that this isn't going on, obviously people who are just easily able to convince themselves that whatever their conception of reality is reality for everybody else. And those are the people who are, starting fights in Walmarts about not wearing a mask. So you definitely have those people. I mean, I think that I'm with you. I have 2 young kids and I probably would not be bringing them into a sit-down restaurant at this point. I'm also personally in a little bit of a different situation because we had COVID and we tested positive for antibodies. So I'm not as concerned personally for my own health as a lot of other people who haven't had the virus are. That being said, I'm with you myself. I would be doing patios. UV light is a huge mitigator of the virus. So sitting outside in the daytime as opposed to going out to a dark bar or sitting on a patio at night definitely makes a big difference. And ultimately, I think that whether it's restaurants or anything else, we're at a point with this, and this is just my own personal opinion. Political orientation aside, if we completely shut down the economy again, it's going to have a disastrous consequence. And I'm not willing to say, the trope sometimes can be, well, who then do you want to decide is going to die? Who are you willing to be responsible for dying from this? And I like to think that people are smarter than those binary kind of black and white choices. I think that we have to reopen the economy because if we don't, the effects in the long term are going to be much worse than they are. We obviously also have to contain the virus. And frankly, people need to be smart. This is, and we've said this to our staffs at the restaurants. I've said literally the same thing to the staffs at the restaurant. If we have to get shut down again, we're a big company. We had cash reserves. We floated our restaurants. We negotiated with our landlords and our vendors and all of this stuff to try and make this work so we can bring people back to work. If there's another huge spike and a long shutdown, we'll have to close the majority of our restaurants, guaranteed. And that's going to be the same for most kind of brick and mortar companies, a lot of whom were suffering before this to begin with. So it's contingent upon people to make good decisions, and we're not always adept at that. But I think that if we're going to make this thing work, and this is kind of what we told the staff, like, you got to take this 100% seriously, or else we're kind of screwed. So it remains to be seen how people in Massachusetts are going to react to the restaurants being open and to, patio versus indoor and stuff like that. As it stands, just in having been open for 2 days so far, we've seen the majority of people being more comfortable on the patios for sure. But I think it's just going to be a process. We're going to have to see what happens. It's hard to say anything, for sure.
One of the reasons I wanted to get you on is because I was talking to Forbes earlier. Restaurants really are a strong indicator of where an economy is heading. So that is frightening for you to say that, if another spike comes, you're going to have to shut down so many restaurants, because that to me tells me that the economy is going to go into a real spiral. So we'll leave with this final question. What would you do? Say you're president, which would be great. What would you do specifically to help the restaurant industry right now?
Specifically to help the restaurant industry, I think extending PPP loans, I think would be pretty much the only thing that you can do. I mean, there's been some good stuff that the states have done. Like, for instance, they floated tax bills, and some of these kind of quarterly and year-long things where, like, our company has to pay their tax bill at the end of the year. And a lot of the time, what some restaurants do, especially larger ones, is they'll actually pay it at the end of the year. So that tax money that they're taking in is kind of extra money, if you know what I mean. And then at the end of the year, then they have their accountants go through everything and they'll pay that bill, but instead of having to pay it quarterly. So in Massachusetts, there was a tax abatement type of situation where we were allowed to float our tax bills and they've extended it a few times. That would be a huge help to not have to pay taxes for a little while. And then the other thing is just the paycheck loan kind of stuff to try and keep people employed if we're in a situation where we're doing 75% less revenue or more. But outside of those kind of relevant, straight up financial things, there's no solution to this situation. The virus does not give an F about what the president does or doesn't do. It's really just about it's really just about kind of bolstering the underlying economics of an industry which is really on the ropes right now. It's very frustrating because there's these, you have like the airline industry that makes billions of dollars in the good times, but somehow they don't save any of that money, and then they get bailed out when the economy tanks. They should have a financial structure where they're saving the money instead of hoarding all of this cash or paying out extravagant amounts of money to shareholders. Maybe pay a little bit of less money and then save some money so that the taxpayers don't have to go. The reality in the restaurant industry is that you can't do that. It's not something that you float. Restaurants will come back if things close down, and I think that there's eventually once there's a flu shot type of COVID shot that people could get if that ever happens. But the other thing that I would say, and this is very something that a lot of people in my industry would probably get angry about, but over the last 10 years, at least specifically in Massachusetts, there's been an exponential growth of restaurants in the city to a degree that's actually been, in my opinion, detrimental to the quality of the actual restaurants in general. There's been so many openings. The labor pool of qualified cooks and managers has just dwindled because there's just so many places. So I think some of this will be a correction in the medium to long term. But as far as the president of the United States, man, I mean, not be an idiot on television and stoke fear. I mean, that would be helpful. Give real information so that people could make informed decisions instead of just having to operate from fear and confusion. That would be good for everybody, I think.
I'm going to, there was one policy, and I'm always leery of quoting Anthony Scaramucci. He said that they should bring back for businesses to be able to write off lunch meetings and their taxes, like temporarily do that to try to open up the businesses coming back to the restaurants at lunch. I don't know. It just seems like a really scary situation all around.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any simple kind of, that's exactly what a Republican would say. I mean, that type of Republican would say. It's not, that's not a solution. It's a soundbite. The solution is to figure out how to actually contain the virus and to try and provide some kind of lifeline to businesses like restaurants that live hand to mouth and are not going to be able to just survive this thing. And the knock-on effect of that's very scary to me is that, like I think you said at the beginning or at some point during this conversation, the amount of people that are employed by restaurants and then the downstream effects of what those, I mean, for instance, we lay off all these people. Our local fruit and produce provider, our purveyor, they laid off probably 80% of their staff. They laid off probably 90% of their drivers, 80% of their warehouse workers, probably 90% of their sales staff. As you go downstream, that's where the amount of money that's generated through these things, that's the real scary thing, because you're talking about many different streams of economic activity being affected by this, and tons of jobs. So I don't think that there's a quick fix. I think the PPP loans are a good way to try and help restaurants and employees. And I think that the tax abatement stuff and tax forgiveness would make a huge dent, because that's just a big check that doesn't need to be written. And it's a smart thing too, because at the end of the day, if all the restaurants close, they're not going to get that tax money anyway. So why not hold off for a while if it's possible?
Oh. And where can people in California eventually are flying back to the East Coast, where can they find one of your delicious restaurants to check out?
So it depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to go out for a really good, really high quality meal, one of our restaurants is called Rochambeau. It's a French brasserie style restaurant, which you guys will know well in the area that you live in, because you have some of the best ones in the country. But the chef over there, Food and Wine Chef of the Year Northeast in 2015, he worked in New York at a number of high-end French restaurants, and as a sous and a number of other positions, then ran several of his own restaurants. I worked with him for a year, and I learned more in that year than I had in the prior 5 years about food. I've been doing this for a long time. So that restaurant's called Rochambeau, Rochambeau, like the French general who was pivotal in supporting American troops during the Revolutionary War. And that's on Boylston Street in Boston, which is a fun area to go to anyways. We have a cafe there, doing some of the best coffee drinks in the city, some kind of light pastry options, and then a really cool lounge that was designed by Home Studios out of New York, who have won a bunch of awards for restaurant design. It's an unbelievably beautiful space, custom painted wallpaper, and just very, very incredible design aesthetic, modeled after kind of some feeling of like the French subway system in the lounge area, and then a beautiful second floor dining room with a open kitchen. Well, there's glass up, but you can kind of watch what's going on in the kitchen. Overlooks the Prue Mall, and so that's going to be one of the best meals that you can have in Boston. If you're looking to have fun, come down to my place. It's on Lansdowne Street around Fenway, and we've got a bunch of bars. One of them is called Bleacher Bar, and there's actually a huge window that looks out on the field. So the Red Sox actually are going to be playing this season. So we're really looking forward to having people in there. They've actually done really well the last couple of days as they've been open. People just wanting to be in that area. And we're going to close down Lansdowne Street in Boston. And it's all just for extended patios out into the street. We're trying to create a whole destination down there so you can kind of go bar hopping without having to get on public transportation a bunch of times or take a cab around the city. There'll be, I think, 7 different bars that you can hit within that block of Lansdowne Street. So That's the party spot.
Actually, Luke, you're selling me pretty well because my wife had been out there for a kind of a conference. My wife is a professor for math, and again, like she just fell in love with that area. So I think you give us a couple good spots. Actually, this is actually right up my alley. So I appreciate actually talking to you just from a very selfish standpoint. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem, man. If you're ever out here, just get my info from Bill, and we'll get you hooked up.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. I look forward to it. You have no idea.
Thank you, Luke. Say hi to Jenny and the kids for me, and I'll eventually be out there. I just got to wait for airfare to not be, I just don't want to be locked in a tube filled with people. Like
and recycled air.
Yeah, it's a concern, and I'm
very legitimate concern.
I'm definitely looking forward to coming out, and I'll definitely look you up. But good talking to you, and thank you once again.
Yeah, great talking to you guys. I appreciate getting it out too. I think it's important for people to get an idea of what everybody's dealing with, So appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of the Free the Bear podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you can, give it a thumbs up. Even if you didn't like it, give it that good old thumbs up and subscribe. I'm very old, but I've been told there is a bell that you're supposed to push or ding or something. So do that. For more information about the California National Party, go to californianational.party. Or on Twitter, vote_CNP. And in conclusion, free the bear. Grr.